Okay, Mr. Ken Smith, how are you doing today?
Hi, fine. How you doing back there? It's say about 6:30 in the morning here in the Philippines, but that's tomorrow morning for you. Yes.
Absolutely, yes. Well, I wanted to do this interview to showcase some of the highlights of your career to the community. So I had prepared a list of questions, and then I want to go through them together. And then, yeah, let's take it as a conversation, um, and let's take it from there.
Okay. And
Great. And
say
I know you have a yeah.
feel free to interrupt at any time.
Okay, great. So the first question is, can you share a memorable project management experience from your time in the U.S. Air Force or other organizations?
Okay. Well, I was in the Air Force as a reserve officer, so it was a dual career with my regular career as a foreign service officer. So I switched backwards and forwards. And this one I think is particularly interesting. It was in the Philippines during the time they released the POWs from uh, North Vietnam. At the time, I was in the U.S. Embassy, U.S. Aid in Manila, but the prisoners of war were coming from Hanoi to Clark Air Base in central Luzon. And so I got a call, you're activated, get up here as soon as possible. So I dropped everything that I was doing and put on my uniform and hightailed it there.
Mm,
And this was in 1973. You see, most of my stuff is historical, be good for the archives. So I'd been in the Philippines here for about, several years, backwards and forwards. And they released the POWs in batches. We sent a lot of flights there to pick them up, bring them back. So it took about 6 weeks to get everybody back, and flights of about 40 people at a time. And our job at the clock was then to process them and get them back to the. This is phase two because phase one was going on in Hanoi. This is when they were trying to get ready to get them out. That's when I got the alarm to get up there, and then my job was to orient everybody on the process. General, General Manna was in charge of it as the 13th Air Force, and then we designated Colonel Truesdale, who was the base commander. He's like the mayor of the base for the functioning of the base. General Manna was responsible for the processing of the people and all the other stuff. My
mm,
job, uh, I was on General Manna's planning staff, and so the great thing about it, what was memorable to me, was I was the one that briefed everybody on the project management processes that we're going to do, because we've got this is a project. Actually, it was a program. There are lots of things going on, and so General Manna called everybody together. I briefed everybody on the tools and then facilitated so that they could do it. There's a whole mess of things we had to worry about. For each
mm,
one of the individuals, we had to take care of them and process them. Because some of them had been in captivity for several years, and some of them had been tortured and were pretty banged up. And so there was getting the people in, giving them their physical tests, psych exams, and any treatment that they needed. They really wanted desperately to get home and call everybody, but it
mm,
takes time to process. So we organized, in effect, everything that's on this list and more. I won't
mm,
go through it, but the thing I want to gave everybody the concept of the work breakdown structure,
mm-hmm,
and then we set up for a precedence diagram, big level. We're not going to get into dirty details at this point, but an overall so that we could see what had to be done, assign people to do it, and then each one of them had to prepare their own precedence network of what comes before what, and then coordinate with the others. And then when we got down to the details, they needed to assign individuals to keep track of the various things. And then we made out checklists for everybody. And then also a checklist for every individual so that when we got through, we knew that everybody had gone through all the stages and had checked on satisfactory. So in addition to the regular networking and the checklisting, we also set up a tentative line of balance, kind of a production role, where we could overlap. So we didn't have to cross one individual and then the next. Concurrently, people were in different stages. Now, bear in mind, in those days, we didn't have cell phones. It was difficult to communicate. A few of the security people had walkie-talkies, but the rest of it was a landline phone or face-to-face. So it took quite a while to get organized, but once we did, then we were running through the process. Again, my job was to set up the whole management cycle process and then let the people get on with what they had to do. This is one of the key things. The base commander, Colonel Truesdale, we called him Billy True. He was a pattern type. The old army, do it my way, this way. And he gave everybody an incentive lecture. He says, if this exercise goes off without a hitch, some senior in higher headquarters will be decorated. If it doesn't, and if anything falls through the cracks, your ass is grass and I'm the lawnmower. So that got everybody's attention. General Manor was a much more smooth manager, but Billy really pushed people to get things done, real action-oriented type, and everything did go great. It was really great. And I say afterwards, we all got decorated for doing a great job. So again, I want to emphasize the thing was the management techniques, the stuff that I'd learned 10 years earlier on work breakdown structure, critical path, and all the other good things. So after that, yeah, sure.
So since you were mentioning that whatever you learned, you started to apply in this kind of unique situation. So then I was gonna ask about when were you first introduced to formal project or program management? Which organization were involved? And also, if you were utilizing any form of earned value management, I assume some other names and shapes, but what was that at the time?
Okay, switching from 73, going back to the 60s.
Yes.
My first introduction to formal project and program management was in the 1960s. If you probably don't remember, you're too young to remember that, but for those of us who were around, 1960s was an earthquake for management. This was when Kennedy came in as the president. McNamara came in as the Secretary of Defense, and McNamara had a reputation as a management science specialist. He was also very, very insistent on shaking up the Defense Department. He came in, he was a Harvard professor, he'd been a business manager, He had been in the Air Force as a statistician, so he knew about the military side. And then he'd been the Ford CEO, and he came in, and the first thing he did was to reorganize the objective. He says at that point when he came in, there was something known as MAD, which is mutually assured destruction. The Russians have atomic things. We have atomic things. If they do anything, we'll blow each other to hell. So McNamara said that's a lot of baloney. What we need to do is a more flexible response. So this put everybody on their heads. The Pentagon at that point had been Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. McNamara wanted what he called a purple suit. He wanted everybody to integrate. Not that we would actually change uniforms, but we would work together instead of isolated programs. We don't ask for our own program unless it fits in with everything else. So McNamara came in, and the thing that he hated was when people said they wanted something based on their military judgment. So he wanted to know, what is the facts that support your judgment? How did you reach your judgment? In fact, I remember going along to his office one time with one of my mentors, and they were asking for additional budget to extend the Navy's carrier fleet. And McNamara asked him, on what basis do you want more money for more carriers? And he says, based on my military judgment, sir. And McNamara just said, well, I appreciate your military judgment, but come back with some facts to support it. And that was it. We walked out of the room. It's incredible. But his whole approach was numbers, charts, percentages, graphs, cost-benefit analysis, everything else. And then who does it, not who is asking for it. One of the key tools that we got involved with was the PERT critical path method, PERT CPM. And this is really where I got involved. PERT CPM had been developed in the private sector by a couple of guys working for DuPont to take down a chemical plant. And at the same time, the Navy had a contract with Lockheed and a consultant, Booz Allen, who were working on it. They picked up or developed independently, I don't know which, but they picked up on the critical path method and added to it this PERT tag. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So after that, this was called the PERT CPM approach. And we got a lot of acronyms here in the military. And the project was the FBM, the Fleet Ballistic Missile, more generally known as Polaris. I don't know whether you've heard of the Polaris project, but this was the big thing in the Defense Department. And Admiral Rayborn was the manager. The Navy set up, separate from the rest of the Navy, they set up a special projects office. And Admiral Rayborn was God. There was another one for the nuclear submarines under Rickover. Rickover, again, was God. He ran his program, and Rayborn was running a parallel program, and ultimately they would be put together. The missile would be put on the submarine to be fired. Well, anyway, we called it a project, but it was really a program in today's language. Admiral Rayborn ran that show. He was in charge of it. Anything he needed, he got. People worked for him. They didn't work for the rest of the Navy. And so he had all the resources he needed to get the job done. And this is before McNamara now. This thing came in almost a year ahead of McNamara and almost 3 years ahead of its planned schedule. Fantastic. You know, in those days, everything slipped schedule. The Navy attributed their success to the PERT CPM method. So when McNamara came in, here is a case study already in being that he's trying to push on the rest of the military.
Yeah.
Now, everybody didn't agree that critical path was the reason.
I see.
There were a lot of other factors. In fact, there was an MIT professor who was doing a study of the project. He said that it wasn't as good as advertised, but it was better than rain dancing. So this is the kind of caustic comments we got. Another guy from Indiana, Russ Stout, who I worked with later, he said, yeah, critical path was fine, but it was just window dressing. There were a lot of other factors that went along with this. I put together a short list of the other factors, so you can take your choice. First of all, there was the Rayborn projectized organization. PMI talks about different modes, but this was nowhere near a matrix. This was projectized. Rayborn was in charge. Everything he needed, he got. When he wanted people to do it, they did it, and nobody interfered. So he didn't have any constraints on that. They also used decentralized decision-making in trying to manage everything at the top. They passed the word down and gave authority to make local decisions. Big one, they didn't have a budget. You wanted it, you got it. You just asked for it.
Wow.
So how about that?
Yeah, that is.
It'd be nice to have a project like that.
No.
We were in a competition with the Russians. We wanted to get our stuff out as quickly as possible. So we did crashing. Everything was top speed.
Yeah.
We also did fast tracking. Instead of the normal, you do this and then next we do that, we did concurrently getting things out. So crashing and fast tracking.
Yeah.
And then to top it off, if there was, and this was a research and development project, so concurrently, we wanted to get something done. If there's several ways to do it, let's try all of them, and we'll accept the one that comes in first. We didn't do something and then find it didn't work. We tried 6 things, and if one of them, as soon as one of them worked, we cut the others and went with the one that worked. So all these things were pushing it. Robo made a decision, we're not going to have change orders. No, change orders are killers on projects. We've got what we're going. If you come up with bright ideas, hold them until the next missile. We're not having change orders. Now, they were forced to have a couple, but they were minimized. And then we had the management information structure. Computers were just sort of coming in then, the big mainframe systems stuff. And we had lots of administrative support. We had all the money we needed to go travel to different places. I say we, I wasn't involved at this time. This was before me. But all of this was going on. And this is where Russ Stout said, it's all window dressing. This critical path stuff, the briefings you're given to Congress and everything else, it's all showmanship. But it was the other factors that made the decision.
One thing I noticed about the other factors is that they knew what is not working more than they knew what needs to be working. So they knew what doesn't work. For example, some of the alternatives didn't work. That's fine. So we know it doesn't work. So let's just go with it, you know. That is
We'll go with something else that doesn't work.
Yeah.
As long as it worked, we moved on.
We moved
So
down,
we,
but yeah. Yeah.
is that the point, or did I miss something
I
there?
noticed some of the points, for example, they are not common in this century right now. You
Oh,
have to have
no.
like decision making, no budget. Some of these are not traditional things that
Yeah,
we
yeah.
currently know.
Yeah. There's nothing traditional about this. This is why
Yeah,
Rustout, it wasn't per critical path. It was all these other factors.
I
You've
see.
got many things going on.
Yeah,
Nevertheless, the Navy said, well, it was the critical path stuff. So
yeah.
McNamara latched onto that when he came in. This is 6 months ahead of him,
Wow.
and he was pushing scientific management. This looked like scientific management, so he says, okay, from now on, all contracts are going to have critical path.
So this is when they mandated on all contracts, the PERT CPM.
Yeah, that was before anything was mandated. This was all in 1960.
Yeah.
McNamara came in 1961 and made the big decree, and that's where I came in 1961. I came in about 6 months after McNamara, and I was hired as a civilian management intern for the Navy Department. I don't know if they're still going on now, but
So this is your
yeah,
first exposure to project controls kind of a domain.
this is where I first came in, and I was assigned as a management intern, and that took about a year of briefings and rotations to different departments. One of my rotations was in the SPO in Admiral Rayborn's office. So I got on the job training in PERT because it was still going on. They were at that point getting into starting up the change order second module, and also getting out the production with the line of balance for producing for the fleet. So they had developed and finished the research and development. Now they're putting it into operation for these missiles. So I had quite a lot of intensive on-the-job training on PERT CPM in the office, monitoring at the higher headquarters. Also went around and visited several of the places to watch what was going on. And then when I finished my internship, where they'd given us a lot of management tools and analysis and statistics and programming and stuff, then I was assigned to the Navy Management Office. And there I did other things, applying some of these tools, but at a higher level, looking at troubleshooting. After McNamara's decree, in 1963, they created an organization in Defense Department called the PERT Orientation and Training Center, POTC. And I was hired as one of the faculty then to spread the word on critical path. And so I did that for a couple of years. We were teaching people about it, then going to their factories or their plants or their base and helping them. We'd give a 1 or 2 week workshop and then help them on the job to actually get started. And then we were always troubleshooting backwards and forward. So I did that for a couple of years, got deep immersion in PERT CPM, bearing in mind that at the back, rust outs, it isn't just the critical path, it's all these other factors. So, don't get carried away that this is the only thing in life. But what they had on the original Polaris project, nobody gets all those benefits anymore. But PERT was still eminently logical, because before that, people didn't have this concept of networking, precedence diagramming, and all the rest.
I see.
While we were there, you were asking about earned value. This was way before earned value.
Yeah.
But Major Dresnack at the time, he was Major Whitey, we called him, and he came to us and he gave us the orientation in PERT cost, which was in effect tagging on to the critical path network and putting in cost estimates. So Whitey was a great guy, and he really worked closely with us, and we tried to spread that work to other places. I didn't get too much involved in it, but I was explaining it to it. I bought into the theory, and I also wrote an article for the Navy Management Review on what is the value of value, and tried to explain to people that this was going to be the coming thing. In effect, and this is still a frustration even today, in effect, what you're looking at is the concept cost for work, not cost against the schedule. You do your budgeting cost for work, you do that for this thing that they now call the planned value, and then you need to monitor the cost for the work. And I developed this much later as part of my training stuff. But the concept, very, very important. So at the training center, our director was named Guy Best. So we used to call all of these things best practices. So that's how I got involved in it. There was a lot of stuff that had gone before me. I got involved on the job, and then I got involved academically, in effect, and then backwards and forwards on the job, helping people to do it.
This is amazing. I mean, I would love to ask more questions, but I'm following my agenda here. So
yeah, sure. Maybe sometime we can come back and do more.
Yes. So the next question, I know it's in present tense, but I'm gonna change it to past tense. So how did you prioritize tasks and manage time effectively in high pressure project environments?
How successful?
How did you prioritize tasks and manage time effectively in high pressure project environments?
Priorities? No, that's different. Maybe a couple of points. After I had finished at the PERT Center, one of the jobs I was going around was to different government agencies, and this is how I got in the Foreign Service. They asked me to look at a couple of their projects as not for implementation, but for litigation. The projects had been overrun and over budget, and they had not used PERT CPM on it. I came in with PERT CPM, reconstructed the projects, and was able to point out where they had slipped schedule. Then the engineers could come in and decide what impact that was. Then the accountants came in and decided how much it would cost. And then the attorneys went to court to try to recover. I asked for a percentage of the recovery. Of course, I'm a government employee, so I was joking. And they just laughed at me, but they did hire me. So after I had actually two job offers. I had one in the White House in Kissinger's war room, and I had another one to work with USAID in the State Department, applying critical path to all their foreign projects. So after a while.
So basically,
Ate one out.
basically you just moved from practice to training, to train the other people
Yeah.
based on the experience. And was there any other people doing the same thing, or at that time?
At the Perch Center.
And were there other people helping you to train?
Oh yeah,
Uh,
there were a group of about five of us, and we
I
went out. Usually we go out in pairs so that we were backing each other up. Uh, one guy was very experienced from the. I was the Navy rep at the time. One guy, but I didn't stick to the Navy. One guy was from the Army. One guy was from the Air Force. One guy was from
Hmm.
the Navy. Me, and then a couple of others that were. I don't think they'd done anything with it before. They probably hired directly as civilians. But yeah, we would go out usually, we'd run programs, orientation programs in Washington. For a while, we were based on Bolling Air Force Base. Then they shifted us downtown Washington, D.C. But then we went from there out on, I used to say, I'd leave on Sunday and come home Friday. That was about the way it was all over the US.
I see. Wow.
Yeah.
So going back to the question, so the next one is, how do you prioritize the tasks and manage the time
Ah,
effectively?
good question. Two ways. As an individual specialist consultant
Mm-hmm.
called in as a troubleshooter, I was working for somebody. I'm not running anything.
Mm-hmm.
I I don't prioritize. I'm not a multitasker. Multitaskers, they make
Mm,
mistakes, they interrupt, they have to do overs and over and overs. My
I,
word, I'm a workaholic.
I see. It's obvious.
That's
Yeah.
how I do it. I work my butt
Mm,
off day and night, get a lot of sleepless nights.
mm,
When I do sleep, I got a lot of nightmares.
mm,
But I always just work my butt off. That's how I did it as an individual. Uh, Left
see.
my family behind a lot of times, never available on holidays or weekends, just work, 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 work. And
Mm,
traveling, same thing. Worked out well for me. I'm still a workaholic mentally. But when I was a manager, I was usually managing things I knew absolutely nothing about, so it was easy. As long as I had technical people to do stuff, I delegate to them.
mm-hmm.
My job is to facilitate for them and
Mm,
to try to keep the outsiders from bothering them.
yeah.
So that's how I did it. Don't micromanage, just
Mm,
facilitate, follow up. That's my mode.
I see.
So I don't know that this is good for everybody. In fact, it's not good for your family life. I can tell you that.
Definitely not good. Definitely not good.
But that's the way I did it.
I see. So,
But one of the
yeah.
things I do require is something that we call CSW, complete staff work. I don't want people coming to me with a half-assed job or asking questions. I want to make sure they understand what the assignment is and then come back when it's done. If you have problems, call me and I'll facilitate. But I don't want to have do-overs. So I don't want somebody to do something and then quit. I want the whole job for whatever I give them. I want it. Unfortunately, I find human nature doesn't work quite that way. And so I always had to follow up. I didn't get and still don't get feedback when I want it.
I
I
see.
give something to somebody, I expect an answer. I usually set deadlines for answers, but when the deadline's missed, then I follow up why didn't you call me? What the hell's going on? It's
Yeah.
I've still got a lot of Patton in me too.
I see, yeah. So, what is your next slide? So the question here is, can you describe a situation where you had to deal with an unexpected project changes or scope creep? How did you handle that?
Okay, we'll fast forward here a few years. In Grenada, in the Caribbean, USAID was called upon, and this is the U.S. Agency for International Development under the State Department. The White House called upon USAID to fix the runway. There's an airport that is being constructed there. I don't know whether you remember or even if you were around at that time, but there was a big revolution going on in Grenada. The communists had assassinated their leader, and we had a lot of medical students there. And so President Reagan got in the act and sent in his troops, and they crushed the rebellion in a week. And then after that, USAID was called upon because they had been building a massive airport down there, and it wasn't quite finished. It was about 85% complete. And so Reagan called upon us and said, I want you to finish the airport runway, and then we'll follow on with the tourism project. Though I guess the rest of the world was mad at the US at that point because the Grenada was under the British. And he didn't tell Maggie Thatcher that we were coming. And so everybody thought that we were interfering, but we were there. So it was a unique situation. I had just retired a year earlier from USAID, but they called me back as a consultant to the meeting. There was the White House and the Defense Department and 2 or 3 other agencies. We were told limited technical scope, fix the runway, finish the runway, and President Reagan wanted it finished in 1 year on the anniversary of the date that we invaded. So it was a top-down directed assignment, very limited scope, tight deadline. So that's the problem. So I met with the group and said what we have to do is map it out and so on and so forth, the usual stuff. First of all, USAID had no business being in Grenada because it was not in our sphere of countries. It was a communist or on the borders of, and we hadn't been authorized to go there. So it wasn't in USAID's portfolio of countries. Nobody had been there. There were just intelligence reports on what the status of the airport was. Nobody had done a feasibility study. There was no budget. Now, governments work in very bureaucratic ways. You can't do anything without money. Unfortunately, but fortunately for us, the Marine barracks in Beirut had been blown up, number of people killed. There was further riots in Beirut. USAID had a budget for Beirut, but they canceled the country mission, so they had money to be reprogrammed. So they said they could reprogram that money for Grenada if they were authorized. Unfortunately, the terms of the money, they could not use direct hire people. They could only use it for people like me who were consultants. So that myself and a couple of engineers were hired to go to Grenada. So we flew to Grenada. We found out it wasn't just the runway that needed finished. There was a complete do-over of the airport was needed. The equipment that the Cubans were using to build the airport was ruined because during the invasion, a lot of it had got blown up or ransacked. So we'd have to fix the runway. We'd have to also get construction equipment. We then found that everything was done. The airport had been designed by the Canadians several years earlier, and it was being implemented by the British, and they were using the metric system. So everything was on metric system.
Yeah.
The US couldn't handle it. You'd have to remeasure and do all kinds of stuff. We found the communication equipment was 1930s stuff from East Germany and the Soviet Union. It was completely obsolete. The air traffic control and nav aids were also outdated. They were still working, but they're pretty useless in that era. This is the 1980s. Also, there was no access road. So apart from the runway, there's all this other stuff. And then suddenly you got to get an access road from the airport to the town. So he came back with that sad story and had another meeting telling them what had happened. And then the legal people said in Washington said, you can't work on that because we're prescribed from working on land that the government has seized without recompensing the people who they took it from. So all that good stuff should be determine who owned it and issue titles for it. I don't know if you know anything about titling of land, but it goes on interminably. We're still having problems here in the Philippines from the land reform project when I was there in the 60s and 70s. They're still wading through it now. Some people still haven't got their titles. The tourism objective that the White House wanted wasn't in AID's scope. We were largely working on agriculture and health and education. If you wanted to do something in tourism, you had to get congressional approval.
I see.
And remember, the executive one thing, but the legislature is another. So immediately we can't do any of this.
Yes.
And then our contracting officer said, and the general accounting officer said, you can't buy or do anything there because these are foreign equipment that was put in, so you can't refurbish that. And the contractors were foreigners, you can't do that. So you're not even allowed to go there. And then the economist said, you can't build or rebuild an airport unless you can prove that it's going to be worthwhile. What's the internal rate of return? And then there was no budget for it. So where's the money coming from? They decided they had to raise money internationally from the other donors or around the world. So faced with all this, that wasn't my problem, but somehow I was able to help on the benefit cost stuff. Years later, I developed this template, which I use for training to figure out discount rates and benefit cost ratios and stuff. When the economist they finally got an economist to come down to do. I'm not an economist, but I've worked with them, so I know the routine. So he was tearing his hair out. How do I get a cost benefit on something like this with a at least a 14% rate of return? I said, well, what you need to do is figure that the airport is done, everything else is a sunk cost except what we're going to do, and then figure out how many tourists you're going to get from our wonderful airport to the life of the airport, and figure out something from that. I'm sure it'll pay off, and you just got to juggle the discount rate. If that doesn't work, something that else I developed is projects should not be done just by the cost alone. You need to look at the political and environmental and give them weights. So this is another template that I use in my training for people to try to come up with a reasonable number. The killer is if you don't get at least a 2 on the environmental, your project isn't going to go. Anyway, with all of that good stuff, somehow my job was done, but somehow it all pushed through, and the airport was opened 3 days late from the 1-year deadline.
Only 3 days late?
With all of those problems going on, somebody resolved it somehow. God only knows. But, so I say this is worthy of the Marines. The Marine slogan is the impossible we do immediately, miracles take a little longer. And this was, there was a lot of improvisation. They didn't have the nav equipment, so the military set up and brought the plane. But they did have an actual commercial plane land on the runway. VIPs there greeted it, cut the ribbons, and did all the good stuff. While I was preparing for this, I looked on the internet and I saw that a couple of years ago, the World Bank authorized 17 million to upgrade the airport.
Oh.
And 3 years ago, the Chinese have extended a $67 million loan under their Road and Belt Initiative. So the airport is still alive. I'm not sure whether it's well, but it's still alive. But our airport that we did in one heck of a hurry under completely unreasonable circumstances, somehow they managed to overcome it. I'll comment on that later.
I see, yes. So having had the conversation about the past, let's turn gears towards training and teaching, your role as a trainer and teacher. So the next question I will ask is, as an instructor or a trainer of project management, what are the key insights or lessons do you normally emphasize when teaching all of these tools to practitioners?
Okay. Key lessons. First of all, people are important. People are different. And in many projects, they don't pay enough attention to the people. They focus on the hardware or whatever the job is. Now, the Myers-Briggs is the classical map for assessing personality types. I'm sure you're familiar with it, with the 16 dimensions.
Yes.
One of the problems I find with the Myers-Briggs is that they're almost all positive, and there's no systematic approach to dealing with it. So when I was deep immersed in this, when I first went, actually from a church group, and then later with a USAID group, I said, I can use this on project management for team building, but it's too complex this way. So I created my own based on the Myers-Briggs. I scaled it down to 4 dimensions.
Yes.
That I call TJ, TP, FJ, FP. And then I say the key thing is you usually don't control who you're working with. People get assigned to you. You don't usually pick them, but you can't just put people to work. You need to figure out where they fit.
Yes.
And you need to capitalize on people's innate abilities plus whatever they've learned that they can manage. And with this is what I call the Smith grid. I find with these, I've got a 16 question test that they answer. They can do it self-testing. And I find that the most people that we have in projects, myself included, TJ, we're action oriented. We want to get the job done.
I see.
A lot of them are quality control types. They want to do it, but they're not in a rush to do it. They want to do it right. And they won't let it go. In fact, I had a professor who, when I got my doctorate, she was a TP. Everything I gave her, she said, this is a good first start or a good draft, and then she'd re-edit it, send it back. I wanted to get the damn thing done. She wanted it perfect.
I see.
Some of us, we overlap. Now, sometimes you assign TJs to TP work and they don't do a good job because they want to get it through. You assign a TP to a deadline, they're always late.
Oh, okay.
So this is the one side, the T side. On the F side, these are people that are largely, the FJs largely extroverts. They love meeting with people, negotiating. The FPs, the green side, these are people that are more introverted. They will run the show if they're appointed, but otherwise they prefer to be on the back. They are fantastic negotiators. Unfortunately, in most situations, you don't get FPs assigned to projects. So one of the things that I always push for is get back to HR. I need an FP. So well, if I can sit on the board, it was great because then I'd administer this test. So when we're looking for people, but you need, whether they are assigned to or not, you need FPs.
Okay.
Usually, one of the big problems we also have is we assign TJs as project managers, and it's not saying they can't do it, but they tend to micromanage because they won't let go of the job. Instead of managing the project, they want to do the technical stuff. So,
yeah.
so with these four categories, when I was working on a consultant job as a team, I'd talk to the leader of the team and say, can we do this so we can be more effective? If I was running a project, I could assign it to the people assigned to me. If not, I just recommend it. But this helps me to sort out who's who and where they best fit. And this worked very well for me. So this is one of the things I teach and emphasize. Look at the people that are working for you, because if they're unhappy or if they're in the wrong box, they're going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to get the best out of them. So
absolutely, yeah, that's amazing. Yes. The next question is, across the years of training, the project managers, what are the key misconceptions about scheduling and earned value you've seen people bring to your classes to ask about or to address and so forth?
Okay. Key misconceptions and malpractices. Let's talk about scheduling, first of all. The PERT CPM is great. The PERT, I didn't talk about that earlier, the CPM critical path method. The PERT part was a formula that was developed by Booz Allen and Lockheed to do a better job of estimating. Unfortunately, people misuse it, and it's a great technique, but you have to use it properly. The second thing is there are not enough milestones in precedent diagrams, and people tend to drop them. So I'll talk about each one of them separately. The PERT CPM PERT formula, you look at the optimistic, weight the most likely by 4, look at the worst case, the Murphy situation, magic formula divided by 6. And they use that as the basis for scheduling. Unfortunately, it's a weighted mean. PMI pushes it. Some places, I've seen it even included in the software. You put in the 3 estimates, it calculates for you and assigns that as the. Unfortunately, it's misapplied. Your mean is 50% probability of occurring. So that's like tossing a coin. Or as I tell people, it's like playing Russian roulette with 3 bullets. And I confront managers, would you play Russian roulette? No, that's only for drunken soldiers and policemen. So, okay, why do you want your project manager to play Russian roulette with 3 bullets? You're out of your mind. And sometimes I get through, sometimes I don't. But without, the formula is great, but you have to adjust it for probability. Otherwise, what you're doing at the outset is planning to slip schedule. Your schedules are wrong in the plan. You haven't used the worst case aspect sufficiently. So what you need to do, and we use the estimated standard deviation by taking 1/6 of the range. So add that 2 standard deviations to it, and that gives you a probability of about 95%. Now, you can't always get that. So years later, this is what I use in my class. You give me your 3 estimates. This is what the PERT comes out with. This is what I recommend. This is what your boss wants or what you are forced to. This is the probability, and you can enter the data in the yellow. So for your project, you can see what your probability is. I don't know if you come across Chris Pinet, but he's a Frenchman, and he looked, I wrote this up in PMI years ago, and he says your probability doesn't take care of the unknown unknowns, so he goes for 99%. But you can plug your numbers in here and
you can see all the
see what you're scheduling.
Yes.
So this is how I overcome that when I'm teaching. The PERT formula is great, but don't go blindly using it at 50%. This will help in that area. Now, for milestones, have a major fight even today. If you don't have start and stop milestones on the critical path road, all you get is a lot of guesstimates. I call them ceiling estimates. You look at the ceiling, scratch your head, and come up with a number. Now, with the activity on arrow, which is what I prefer to use where I can, you have your critical path on a schedule. A lot of projects, you cannot do a good job of calculating the critical path. I accept that because in many cases, you really don't know what you're doing in the future. If you've done a road 2 or 3 times, you know how to build a road. There's some variant. But if you're doing something that's completely new, you really don't know. So my friend Paul Giammalvo recommends rolling wave. You only schedule in bits and defer your estimates until later. But when we use the precedence diagram, and what I have below is a precedence diagram of the arrow with the milestones. If you do this, then you can still monitor by milestones. But if you don't do this, and a key point, this is where, again, another area of confusion, a lot of people mix the two and they think the arrows are activities. The arrows are activities on this system. The arrows are not activities on this system. The arrows are just linkages. So this is but at least in this one, we still have the milestones for monitoring. What happened is that then this gradually evolved into precedence diagram, and they dropped the milestones and they put all the information in the activity block. If you get a computer run, then it doesn't have the milestones, but it has the activity with all the information in it.
Okay.
Again, the arrows are not activities, the arrows are linkages.
Yes.
So now we find more and more people are dropping the milestones out. So without that, all you have is a lot of guesstimates. So here we have the precedence diagram. And instead of having lots of activities and milestones, we count the number of milestones, treat them equally weighted, and you've got a clear picture of what's going on. Otherwise, when people are mixing it up, they estimate or guesstimate each one of these durations that's ongoing. And so their performance, and God knows how they get the earned value out of it, but they get the performance estimated as not only the milestones that are completed, even if they're not shown up, but also a percentage of the running time. So my recommendation is add milestones to your precedence diagrams. Use the milestones for monitoring. When it comes to earned value, again, widespread misunderstanding of what earned value is. In my classes, I get people that are working and they still don't know what earned value is. And if they've heard of it, and again, a lot of them never heard of it, but if they've heard of it, they still don't know how to calculate it. So we find project personnel mix up earned value with planned value.
I see.
Financial people think planned value is present value. They've never heard of earned value and they've got no interest in it. It's an imaginary number as far as they're concerned. Everybody else doesn't even know what things except what is the actual cost. Planners estimate all their costs of present values. Is another problem. And they don't think of future values and discount rates when they're estimating costs for a long project. If you've got a 5-year project, the cost today for something is not going to be the cost 5 years from now. So that is very often overlooked. So all this leads to complete misunderstanding and misuse of earned value. And then when people contractors report their costs on the job, they don't report by work breakdown structure budgets. They report by line items. So personnel is so much, and this is so much. So I don't know how people even come up with earned value. The few times I tried to track it on some projects, it didn't track. So they really don't understand what earned value is about. This is the biggest problem, I think. Only the practitioners of earned value know what it is, but nobody else seems to know or apply it properly. I personally haven't been involved, particularly in the past 20 years, of anything, so I don't know what the state of the art is now. But when people come into my class, this is the kind of thing that getting back to the basic concept of earned value that I learned as PERT cost. We got cost against the work, against the milestones. This is the planned value. It's also the earned value when you've done the work. So you can immediately see what is the actual cost compared with what your planned value was whenever, well, certainly when the work's done. So there's no time scale on this one. All we're looking at is the cost against the work. Another thing I found, and I wrote an article on this for the College of Performance Management 24 years ago, that said there are 13 different states in which a project can be in terms of the planned value, actual, and earned. This is a listing of the 6 good ones, the 4 mixed up ones, and the 3 bad ones. And this re-emphasizes most of the time people estimate it incorrectly. Unless you're on schedule, everything else is, most projects are not on schedule most of the time. So most of the time, whatever's being reported is wrong. Again, with that, I developed a template that I use for teaching. You put in the plan, actual, earned, and it tells you what your index is, why it is, and what the status is, and does a performance estimate for you. So there's a number of tools I've developed to try to teach people this, even if they don't really get it the first time. The way that I teach it then is after I've taught them what it is, I put them in small groups and give them a simulation problem with some templates and get them to work through.
Yes.
In the short term that I have with them, I'm sure they still don't quite get it, but hopefully if they practice with it, or they come back to it, they'll get a better understanding what it's all about. Biggest problem with earned value is people don't understand it and they misapply it. But it's a very simple concept. You plan a cost for something and how much did you pay for it? Another big problem with it is the term value itself. Complete reversal of what normally people talk about as value. Value is what you pay for something, what you want for something, not what you plan to pay for it. But in earned value, value is what you plan to pay for something, not what you actually paid.
I see. Okay, I mean, first of all, I want to mention to everyone that you prepared around 60 slides, I believe, and I've never seen these slides before, so thank you for doing that because it helps a lot with the discussions. And just to, I have a final question. I know we're a little bit,
No
so
problem.
the final question will be, what advice would you give to a new project manager entering the field based on your decades of experience and lessons learned?
Okay, my lessons learned. First of all, systematic management is fantastic. I've lived by it, and McNamara reinforced it for me. But people make the decisions. This is one thing that he unfortunately missed out on. He thought the system was superior rather than the people.
Yes.
People use the systems to clarify what it is and see what they can do.
Yes.
But ultimately, it's people that make the decisions. So if you have a subject matter specialist on your team, you don't have to be a subject matter specialist to manage a project. I managed a lot of projects and I consulted on a lot of projects where I knew nothing more than a Reader's Digest understanding of what the technical aspects were.
Oh, I
Went
see.
and visited roads, hospitals, buildings, whatever it is, agriculture projects, land reform project.
Yes.
You name it, I've probably been involved in the project. If I was assigned to manage it or run it, as long as I have a technical specialist to rely on, they're the guys that I go to. My job as a manager is to facilitate them getting the job done
And follow up.
and
Facilitate
follow up.
and follow up.
So for project managers, don't do it yourself, particularly the
Okay.
technical specialists. Those TJs that are managers,
Yes.
your job is different now. You may be the world's greatest expert on engineering for this aspect, but your job now is to facilitate. So don't micromanage and always follow up.
Let me see.
I've written a couple of books on this. This is my commercial.
Go
I wrote the
ahead.
project management praxis several years ago. These are detailed tools and techniques and how to use them based on what I learned, plus my experience. More recently, musings. This is what I've written about the problems I've encountered and suggestions for overcoming them with a lot of the templates. Both of them I've put together about 150 templates for different aspects of these things. They're both on the Amazon's worst sell list. If you can help me to get it off the worst seller list, I don't expect to get to the bestseller list, but at least if you can remove it from the from the lowest level, I'd appreciate it. And if you send me your proof of purchase, I'll send you the toolkit with all the templates.
Yes, I will certainly ask my colleagues at the College of Performance Management to put the links out there as well, and your email address if somebody wants to contact you. And yeah, I mean, I really wanted to do this conversation because I think it's amazing to hear about decades. How many decades?
This is 60 years I've been plugging this stuff.
60 years. So this is amazing, and this is a
For the
lot of
past, yeah, so for the
this.
past 20 odd, I've been largely teaching, but still once I did a project for our church last year. So again, we get a church lighting for somewhere out in the provinces. So what does it take? Who do I have to get with? They appointed me as the point person. Again, I know nothing about solar lighting, but I went and
But
managed to
you,
get raise the funds and get the people together to do it, and they got their lighting for Christmas. So
yeah, that's
I felt
great.
good about that.
Yes, that's still a project management, so that's great.
Yeah,
And
I
just
say every process is a potential project.
exactly. And most of what you shared with us today was historical information, but very important. But I was not born during that time. So I was
Yeah.
just listening as any other listener today. And it was amazing to put the light on a lot of these historical information. And I value that. So hence, I was very interested to have this conversation with you. And thank you so much again for your effort. I mean, I know how much work you put to create 57 slides, and this is not easy, and you took this very seriously, and we thank you for that at the College of Performance Management, and for your time and for waking up very early to do this. And I know you emailed me, and so I was waiting. So thank you so much.
Okay.
We really
Well,
appreciate.
thank you.
Yeah. Anything final that you want to mention? Otherwise, I'm gonna stop the
Now,
record.
I can send you a couple of the uh, templates that I was using, so you can see how they work. And again, if everybody wants the whole kit and caboodle, they know where go to Amazon. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.